Hi there, everybody. Meteorologist Andrea Michaels here, alongside meteorologist Danielle Miller. We are really excited to nerd out here and talk about winter.
Yes.
As you might know, we released the FOX43 Weather Smarts Team winter weather forecast for the entire season, of course, a couple days ago. And we wanted to talk more in depth.
Yes.
I mean, it's a lot to do a seasonal forecast, and especially when you want to get very detailed and talk temperatures, precipitation, and things like snow amounts. So it's a lot of work, and there's a lot that we don't fit into the few-minute presentation that we put together for you. So this is the opportunity, especially for people who might be very interested in weather, to kind of geek out and talk about our thoughts here.
Yes. So it was like a 3-minute story on the news, but here we can dive deeper and discuss, and you guys can add questions and that kind of stuff. So, but before we look ahead, let's look backwards.
Yes. We'll talk about last winter. Now, this was the first time that we were doing a winter forecast of our own. And I have to say, this, I don't want to say we got an easy one because, you know, winter can always throw its curveballs.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not so clear with the setup and the factors and the patterns that you have going into the season. Sometimes making your choices can be pretty difficult. Now, we had a 3-year La Nina, so it was La Nina for the third winter in a row. And that hadn't happened very often. It was only a few times in recorded history.
Yeah.
And it was very distinct, the takeaways from that, Danielle.
Yeah, so obviously our forecast included lower than average snow totals, warmer than average temperatures, which we kind of knew that was going to pan out.
Yes.
And that did pan out. We were good.
I believe our range was what? Was it 14 to 24, 15 to 25? It was something like that.
14 to 24
inches.
inches.
If I remember correctly. And I remember initially wanting to go lower, but I will admit, and I'm not saying, you know, we were right, like whatever. I know ultimately what we chose, it was still off.
Yeah.
So I'm not, but I remember my initial gut instinct was
really
low because all of the 3-year La Ninas, there was very little to no snow. We had a couple other patterns that really were going to limit our ability to get the cold into our area, to keep the cold on our side, along with the storm track. We'll talk about this more, but it's the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and the polar vortex. You'll hear that come up more in this discussion again this year because these are also factors, one in particular, too, that kind of played a very pivotal role in our decisions this year. So, I mean, what was it? In total, it was 5 inches?
5.9 inches.
Of snow for Harrisburg.
Our trends were correct. We did not predict historic lack of snow.
Yes, and I will admit that I felt, you know, first year doing it, you're putting yourself out there. That was where our initial guts were leaning, but we admittedly, not that we played it safer by still forecasting well below average snow, but we were trying to be a little safer than that. And we remember that there were hints in December that if the cold could connect with the storm track, we might be able to pull off a larger storm. So we wanted to allow for that to happen. The possibility.
That's okay.
Our range really banked on that, and that's why that fell short.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's ifs, ands, and buts and whatnot. It is what it is. It's seasonal forecasting. The one thing that I recall that was such a strong signal, though, very warm Februarys.
Yes.
That was one signal with third-year La Ninas that really stood out. And then with a strong negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and a strong polar vortex. That meant that the cold was going to have a lot of difficulty getting to us all season. A little bit different this year, obviously.
A lot different this year. Let's dive into it.
A lot different. No more La Nina.
No, welcome El Nino.
Which, for those who might need a little bit of a refresher here, that is, instead of cool waters along the central Pacific, along the equator, those are warmer waters instead. So it's kind of the opposite, but not necessarily the opposite in effects, but it's different. The kind of setup that you can expect here. So El Nino, it's not so clear with snow here how we do.
Not at all.
In fact, when we looked back, and we only looked back in the past 20, 30 years or so, and, you know, there were big snow El Niños, there were pitiful
Yes,
El
really
Niños,
bad.
and in-betweens. So we were trying to look and delve into similar years. This is a pretty moderate El Niño in terms of intensity.
Yeah.
Not one of our strongest, although...
It could be trending that way.
Yeah,
We'll see.
it could. Some are calling for a historic one. That's a possibility, but we see that as kind of the lower end of
Yeah.
possibilities. It can't be discounted, but we're not really banking on it.
Yeah.
But it could get up there. But moderate El Niños have been gracious to us with
Yes.
snow as well. So we were trying to find what could, is there anything that seems to indicate one way or another? What gives us a well above average snow year like this? These
Yeah.
seasons, what were they? 2002 to 2003 and 2009 to 2010.
Nearly double.
Yeah, nearly double. Harrisburg almost got 60 inches of snow, and the average is just shy of 30 inches. So, I mean, that's impressive. We did find not a reason for all types of snow, high, medium, or low,
Yeah.
high, average, or low. You know what I'm trying to say here, but we did figure out something that seemed very strongly connected to what happens when to what happens when we actually have when we
El
actually
Niño.
when we have not just the El Nino in place, but like when we've got the oh my goodness, I just totally lost my train of thought here. What was I trying to say?
You're good.
I'm too busy staring at my graphics that are coming up
Are you
next.
trying to talk about basins or not yet?
Not yet. I don't
Okay.
think so yet. So what I was going at was, I guess, sort of basins. Yeah, that was
Okay.
the rabbit hole I was about to go down.
Okay.
And what makes it snowier and what makes it
Yeah.
not.
So this is a typical El Nino
Yes.
pattern, which features a more active subtropical jet, which typically makes a wetter southern United States. And as you can see, northwestern typically a little bit warmer. This is kind of like your bread and butter typical
Yes,
pattern.
typical. There are obviously other things that we look for that might help determine, where that colder air is. You might notice the colder air tends to be locked up a little bit more in the northeast. Also, something to point out, that drier blotch
Yeah.
out into the Ohio Valley, parts
Tennessee
of
Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something notable too, because that can kind of slip its way into the western part of Pennsylvania and the northern tier in certain years. It can lead to drier than average conditions too for us. But sometimes, depending, like you were saying, looking at our El Nino basins.
Yes.
So the entire Pacific Ocean along the equator, it's divided into these sections where we look at temperature anomalies. And just, to break down the jargon, it's just another word for how much above or how much below what's considered average. What are you? So you would be looking for in an El Nino basin, you would be looking for above average temperatures, and then vice versa for La Nina.
Yep.
Some basins will show up with El Nino and others don't. There is one primary basin that they use that kind of averages a good chunk of it, that they tend to go off of when giving out their projections. But we notice that where the water is cooler than average, where it's spread out, and where the warmth is spread out, or maybe relatively cooler, not necessarily cooler than average, where it might just be neutral or average.
It's
so
all
to
relative.
speak. Yeah, it's all relative here. If you have most of your warmer than average temperatures kind of centered, kind of squashed in, and then you have cooler waters in the far western Pacific, and then
Close to the
relatively, cooler waters close to the South American coastline, that seems to generally favor big snow years. Problem was, it's not this year.
No, not this year.
So snow lovers, we're not saying you won't get snow, but we felt like we could rule out this possibility because we look like this this
all
year.
warm.
And for what it's worth, why we aren't completely discounting the warmer scenario where we get, a really strong El Nino is because the basins looked like this in some of our strongest El Ninos.
Yeah. Which
So-
is, if that's where we're heading, that's where we need to put stock into.
And we have to keep in mind, too, this year we have had record ocean water temperatures, record
Yes.
high, not just in the Pacific, but you might have heard a
Everywhere.
lot about the Atlantic too. Yes. So that has to carry some weight too, that
Yep.
we might be dealing with something, yes, that we haven't before. So that's why you might be hearing some sources say this could be one of the strongest ones ever.
Yeah.
So this is why we did have to give weight to some of our not so happy El Nino
No.
seasons.
And they're really not happy El Nino seasons. They're pretty similar to last year's La
Yeah.
Nina. So here's a couple of those well below average
Mhm.
snowfalls. So 91, 92, 97, 98, barely 10 inches of snow for Harrisburg.
And I do want to throw in there too, the 91 to 92, it wasn't too strong. I would say a moderate would
Moderate.
be a good way to put it, but I wanted to put it up there because it was one of our
Yeah.
least snowiest. But the 97 to 98, I think it was our second strongest on record.
Yeah.
I think the strongest was the 83 to 84 season, correct?
Yes.
Which we did look at. And although that was one of our strongest El Ninos, it
Yeah.
actually produced nearly average snowfall, maybe a little bit above
Yep.
or so.
Yep.
What was it, like 36 inches, I believe?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I have the papers too. I could look.
We've
I
been
don't
taking
know.
notes for weeks and weeks.
And it was 82
weeks.
to 83. My bad.
Yep, yep.
I have a cheat sheet, and I'm not even using it,
Yes.
guys.
And the reason we talk about
But-
all of these years is you want to find years that can kind of match all of
Mhm.
your patterns. And so
Yes.
that's been proven really tricky for us this year, not only for El Nino, but
Mhm.
we can't find a year that matches all of the patterns that we have set up.
And that's why we said that El Ninos, they're not so clear when
Yeah.
it comes to snow sometimes. Plus, you got to look at some other patterns too.
Yeah.
So, we tried to look. We looked at, so our first thought
Mhm.
process was, okay, well, we talked the Pacific Decadal Oscillation.
Yep.
Let's look at this one first, and then let's look at the polar vortex.
Perfect.
And I think we have a little something to go over. Yes, here we go.
Here it is. The PDO is
Yes.
the shortened word for this.
And we will refer to it as such from here on out now that we are addressing it.
Yes.
But basically, what this setup looks like is that you get this, when it's in its negative phase, you get this ribbon of cooler water up the west coast and warmer water pretty much everywhere else. And it
Mhm.
expands all the way out towards, Western Pacific, like Japan.
Yes.
So that means that you tend to get your cooler and your wetter weather in the Western U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of forces the opposite because
us.
whenever we have what we call a dip or a trough in
Yeah.
our jet stream, you get a ridge or warmer and drier conditions east. That also played a huge role in last year's
Yes.
forecast. It has been in the strongest negative phase that it has been in decades,
Mm-hmm.
and it hasn't quite let up yet, Danielle.
No, which maybe it will, which would be great for snow lovers.
It is, and that would definitely be a help with El Nino. But we find a problem here. So when we looked back at the numbers
Yeah.
and saw how much of a shift there was because,
Yes.
El Nino, it's a warming of the waters. Maybe we can force some of those warmer waters to flow up this way. It seems
Mhm.
that they are tied in, and usually when you do have an El Nino, it eventually does force a more neutral or at least a positive phase of the PDO.
Yeah.
Problem is, we haven't seen the kind of shift ever
Yeah.
looking back in the last 10 to 20, 30 years that we
Mhm.
would need to even get fairly close to neutral. So we're a little
Yes.
hesitant on this. I
Yes.
know a lot of people are banking on. I
Uh-huh.
feel like that this is what a lot of people are banking on
Yeah.
to go snowier.
And the problem is we have no great way of forecasting this current pattern right now. Like there are
Yes.
people way smarter than us helping to develop these forecasts and these big climate forecasts, and we can do El Nino, La Nina forecasts
Mhm.
at this point, but we can't really do this.
Yeah, it's just kind of we rely on time. It's usually, it goes in cycles.
Mhm.
An end to the cycle is probably coming.
Yes, but is it this February or is it next February?
Yeah.
Or July? You never know.
Somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Is it too late for this winter season?
Yeah.
So that's, that brings a lot of hesitation here. It's not a deal breaker, though.
No.
But it will make it harder.
Yeah.
And we think it's safe to say that a shift will not come in December.
Correct.
We think it's too strong right now. And if we were, and now we're kind of, speculating here. Again, like Danielle
Mhm.
said, we have no way of knowing for sure. But if we were to predict that, okay, it does eventually let up, it would have to be later in the winter.
Yeah, so February, hopefully.
Yes. So If it's a little earlier, maybe we can get it in time for late January, but I'm even a little hesitant to say the second half of January. Yeah. So we kind of decided February would be our wild card month here, where
December was last year. We thought if we want a big snow, it'll be December. This year we're saying February is kind of that big wild card.
Yes, and there would be not just that we thought one storm would do it in December. Yeah. We think we could, if everything goes right and according to plan, we could get one, maybe two bigger snows. Not like historic big, maybe 2-footers.
Yeah, no.
Like we've had in the past, but
a healthy couple of inches.
A couple healthy storms that help us out here.
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Yes, in short, we'll see what happens. We're not so convinced on this, but we do know that if we get this shift and if it comes, February would likely be the snowiest month.
Yes, out of the next 3.
Yes, out of the next 3. Maybe the second half of January shows up, but we're less confident in that. And it just comes with the territory when you're doing this type of climate forecasting. We also have to talk about the polar vortex, our buddy, the polar vortex.
Everyone loves to talk about this in the winter.
Oh my gosh,
on the news, we're always chit-chatting about this.
You're death cold, everybody. You're death cold.
Well, and it's kind of funny with this one because it's opposite of how you think. When it's really strong, you're actually not getting that cold. And when it's weak, that's when you're getting chilly.
Then you can get chunks of air to break off from the poles and then come down. Now, the problem here is this is where we think the PDO helps.
Yeah.
El Niño helps with getting the storm track on our side, to our south and to our southeast.
Yes.
The PDO would help direct those colder shots more towards us. Because if we see a flip to the positive phase, it would be the opposite, which means we get the unsettled and the colder side of the bargain here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we think if all this were to shift that way, fine. And the polar vortex does look much different. It doesn't look as strong this year. So there will be more opportunities for the cold air to connect.
It's just a matter of connecting.
Yes, exactly. And last December, perfect example. Remember when we got that cold around Christmas, bad lake effect snow in Buffalo?
Yes.
We were cold, but
nothing here.
No storms.
No.
You got the cold, but the storm track was just not happening.
Yeah.
You have to hope for a lot of these things. If these 3 things can come together, which is very possible.
Yeah.
This could, at least be decent, better for snow lovers.
Yes. I know, I love saying better, but it's if you like snow, this is great.
Yeah, but if you don't like snow, then this is worse.
Yes.
So I guess we're taking this from the perspective of a snow lover.
Yes.
But so there's a lot of ifs and buts. A lot of things are not nearly as clear as last season.
Yeah. But I still feel pretty good about these numbers.
We do. We like where we've landed. We could have easily just played it safe, we think, and just gone nearly, if not slightly above average. That seems to be the general consensus among El Niño years.
Yeah.
But if we're only looking at recent El Niño years with a similar type of setup, our snowiest El Niños in this situation did have the PDO on the side to start. My example that I want to use here is the 82 to 83 year that we had mentioned earlier. That PDO, it was slightly positive, so I think we could call it more neutral to start.
Yeah. And
we also had it at least get a little stronger.
Yes.
The positive phase. So we had that on our side all along.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
We don't have it this time.
We don't. Now, polar vortex, I mean, it was strong, okay, but we were somehow able to overcome that. So the PDO, despite a strong polar vortex, we were still able to get some breaks of cold air our way. We were able to force some of it down from time to time regardless, so that ultimately got us there. February was the big performer that year too, by the way.
Well, and something else to note, that was 30 years ago. Our average temperatures have warmed since then. So last year, our average February temperature was 33. So we were cold enough even without that weaker polar vortex to kind of help us out a little bit.
Yes, so we had the cold on our side, and that's not something it looks like we're going to have, first of all, going into this season. December could be pretty mild in at least the first half of January.
Yeah.
And you make an excellent point, too, about only going back 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, it's hard in a changing climate. Our records go
Yes.
back to 1880, but you can't necessarily use those as comparable years because we have done a lot of damage. We have done a lot of things to our atmosphere that have changed how our weather works.
And whether you believe it or not, believe that we're the cause or not, at the very least, we can all agree the Earth is warmer.
Yes.
And we can't use years from 1900 to 1920 or 1930. They're just
not relevant
generally
anymore.
colder. Yeah, it's not going to give us a look, which is why we didn't look past 1980. Our only more recent El Nino years could really give us a true idea. It would just...
It's hard.
Yeah, it is. It would just be too much. It would muddy up the waters here. So, all right, putting this all together, blah, 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 aside.
Yes. Let's talk numbers.
Yep. The moment you've been waiting for. Or maybe you just wanted to hear it more in depth if you've heard this already from us. But here is a look at the average temperature projection here.
Yes. So average for Harrisburg, and this temperature forecast is December, January, and February.
Yes, it is the average of the average temperature over these 3 months.
Yes.
So the average temperature
through meteorological winter.
Yeah. So when you're taking the average temperature on any given day, it's the average between the highs and the lows.
Yep.
That is that number averaged throughout the winter.
Yes.
So a little complicated here.
Yes.
We're not just looking at average high temperatures separately or average lows separately. It's the whole picture combined.
Yeah.
We think, and this is one thing that is at least clear. The snow isn't too clear with El Niños, but most El Niños are warm.
Yes.
Most of them. And we're going at least 1 to 3 degrees higher.
Yeah.
We think that's...
And I think this is a good guarantee.
Yes.
We're thinking if we do get chillier, it will be February again.
Yes.
December and at least the first half of January are going to be mild.
And just to clarify, when we say milder, that doesn't mean we won't get colder spells.
No, not at all.
It doesn't mean it's just going to be mild all the way through. We did get cold last year, too. Like I said, it's the context of highs and lows over those 3 months.
Yeah.
So there will be cold. Couple questions is, will we be able to keep the cold long, whatever cold we get?
Yeah.
And last year, we struggled to keep it for more than a couple days. We could very well run into that problem again, at least through the first half of winter.
And we've kind of been seeing that this fall. We'll get a cold snap, and then it's back to near 70.
And one thing I've noticed, too, and I've showed this, and I've talked about this, and I'm sure you have, too, so when our temperatures have been above average, it's usually been by a big amount.
Yeah, well above average.
Yes, and for many days. While, yes, we've had some days that have had colder than average temperatures for quite a few, it's just not nearly as much, or the cold is not nearly as cold as the warm is warm.
Yes.
Hopefully that made sense. Made sense in my head. So you still have to count, can we still count on that? We haven't seen an ultimate shift yet. We're getting colder as you would expect for the seasons, but the pattern hasn't truly flipped.
Yeah, correct.
And it could, and when we're talking climate, these things take weeks to happen. Weeks, if not months. So, and we're still in the months process here. So we'll keep an eye on it and everything, but
we feel pretty good about this temperature forecast.
Yeah, we do. We think that's pretty clear. The snow, obviously not so clear, but this is ultimately where we decided to land. We did debate lower again this year.
We did.
Because, looking at that El Nino basin and that it's just so warm all the way through.
Yeah.
It's showing up in all of the basins. And I believe in that second year I showed the, 92 to 93 year or not? No, the 91 to 92 year it was.
Yeah, 12 inches.
That wasn't spread all throughout like that. Yeah. Even though it was still a low performing one. I believe it was I have my notes here. I keep forgetting. It was strong in the third basin. Basins 1 and 2, farthest out west, they really didn't get too warm until March.
Okay.
It was after winter,
but
we still had pitiful snow. We did get a flip, though, from a negative PDO to a positive PDO by January. It was barely neutral and barely above.
Yes.
But it also wasn't coming from such a strong, it was not coming from such a strong negative spot.
No, correct.
But we think in short that this really points to the PDO might make or break it. El Nino, yes, is the main driver here, but we think as far as getting the cold air in.
Yeah, that's going to be
The
do or
PDO
die.
will make or break our forecast here.
Yeah.
So big side note on that one.
So our forecast is
Yes.
slightly below average.
Mhm.
Average is near 30 inches. We're saying 17 to 27. So more than last year by
Yes.
a good bit.
More than last year. We think we at least do stand a good chance of that.
Yes.
With a weaker polar vortex, there will be more opportunity.
Yes.
And, you know, a little bit of it is rolling the dice. And you think about it, it's like, well, how many storms will end up like last year if we have more, possibly, if a
Mhm.
more active pattern this year?
Yeah. So
So
We'll see.
that's kind of where our thought process was there.
And we got to give you some bold predictions.
Yes.
We're going to give you city by city.
If it was just one number, which, yes, and we will address this, it is a crapshoot, but this is for fun. This part, anyway.
Yes, this one is.
This part
Yes.
is more for fun than anything. If we were to pick one number within that range that everybody could just cookie cutter fit into, we would say 25 for Harrisburg, 25 inches, 27 for Lewistown, and then 24 for Lancaster. They're pretty close this time.
Yeah, not
around.
as much of a spread compared to last year. And one of the things that we've seen in some of that pattern work that we've looked at is strong El Niños leave central and northwestern Pennsylvania drier.
Yes.
So that's why Lewistown isn't higher than Harrisburg by that much.
At the start, you know, first half of the season with these little storms, it
Yeah.
might look a lot like last year where at first they're getting lucky with the snow
Mhm.
and maybe areas south and east of Harrisburg, right around that cutoff.
The typical spots.
If you lived in that cutoff, you know you lived in that cutoff.
Yep.
Let's just say that. Between snow and some ice and then just the plain old rain and maybe you got a little bit.
Yeah.
So if that flips, it'll kind of even out because with a strong El Nino and the storm track usually to the south and to the east, if you get
Yeah.
the cold air, your higher snow amounts are actually
York,
favored,
Lancaster,
favored
Lebanon.
in York and Lancaster counties. There's more nor'easter potential
Yep.
too, so that would favor them for higher amounts too.
Yeah.
So if there's a flip, it could even out a little. That's why we have them so close.
Mhm.
And then, you know, you could be near that back end cutoff, which, oh man, I would rather forecast where you find the mixing line than
the
back end cutoff on a storm. That is the worst.
Yes.
Because it's no gradual change. It's like a sharp. All right, you
Yes.
got like a foot here and then, sorry. Sorry, friends. Not
I-
very much for you.
State college students are probably watching that with these types of setups because
Yes.
they're either having school or they're not.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. So, in short, I mean, this obviously really banks on a lot of things happening. We know we
Yep.
have an El Nino. We know that El Nino is going to be the main driver. Could we get a little bit more snow if we get the shift in the PDO as we are expecting?
yeah.
Sure. That would easily bring us a little more closer to the average.
But if it doesn't shift at all,
And this El Nino does continue to get stronger because I believe last I checked from the Climate Prediction Center, they see a 30% chance,
okay.
most recent, to my knowledge, of it becoming one of those stronger El Ninos.
Yeah.
And that obviously did not bode well for us the
Uh-huh.
last time we got that strong, or even if we get a little closer to being that strong. And it is a pretty viable possibility.
Oh, yeah.
I'm almost afraid it's more viable of a possibility than a PDO shift right about
Then,
now.
yeah.
In which case, you know, this has the potential, we think, a stronger chance of being less than it does being more closer to average snowfall.
Yeah. Unfortunately for
Yeah.
snow lovers, yeah.
Yes.
I agree.
We're trying to be, for at least snow lovers, a little more optimistic this year because there's definitely more opportunity to account for than there was last year.
For sure.
But-
But we'll have to see. We'll
Yeah.
check back in end of March and
Yes.
see what happens.
Yes, for sure. And we'll let you know.
Yeah.
Wishing you snow lovers well, wishing you guys the best.
Yes, and we'll keep you updated. Of course, this is a long-range forecast.
Yes.
We've got your daily forecast every morning. Braden's got it every night. Allie's got your back. So we'll get
Whenever
you through
she's
the winter.
back from
Yes.
maternity leave, we miss her. But
Yes.
yes, she can send us pictures from home.
Her and the baby can enjoy some
yes.
snow.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, we'll check in with you guys later. We'll keep you up to date. Have a good one.